Oh, welcome to the December 2023 Planetarium Zoom seminar. Today we have Jean Creighton, who will present about building diverse collaborations. As a brief introduction, she completed a bachelor's degree in physics at University of Athens, Greece, and then crossed the Atlantic for a master's degree in astronomy at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and a PhD at the University of Waterloo, Ontario. And she's been teaching astronomy at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee since 1999 and has been planetarium director there since 2007. Before I officially hand it over to you, I want to say that some of you have already started this. There's a sign-in sheet, which is also known as the chat. So if you could sign in, then we'll know who's here. Okay. Jean, it's yours.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for making time for this. I know that this is an interesting time of year, whether your summer is a beginning or your winter. So thanks for making the time. I'm going to share my screen, and I will probably interrupt, I'm hoping 2 times anyway, so that if you do have a burning question, you can ask, but also Alan has graciously agreed to monitor the chat if something occurs to you that you just want to type in, that you could. So the official title of this conversation is Engaging Our Communities, Building Collaborations to Enrich and Diversify Planetarium Programs. Part of this is motivated by, I think, a need that we all feel that our audiences, well, I shouldn't speak for all, I speak for myself, that the planetarium, our planetarium and other planetariums I've been to don't seem to always do a good job of representing, having in their audiences a representation of their communities. They seem to be whiter, more affluent, and more educated than the average member of the community. So one of my goals early on when I became the director was, how do you get more people of all different backgrounds in our space? And the best advice I was given very quickly from, at that time, this was an organization on campus that was helping students, especially first-generation students, because I work at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And we're a research institution, but we're also an access institution. And they said, if you want to get different kinds of people in your dome, talk to the Indigenous folks on campus and talk to the Muslim people on campus. And I thought, okay, that sounds great. So I started sending emails to different entities on campus. The Electra Quinny Institute for Indian American Education is the umbrella under which this group operates. And I wasn't getting anywhere. So I just had to wait, and luck came my way. A person who was in fact the director of the EQI and very interested in stars happened to be outside the planetarium. We got talking. So we started a collaboration, and the idea that I had was that we would make a planetarium program for each of the nations in Wisconsin. So that would be Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Ojibwe, Oneida, Potawatomi, Stockbridge, Muncie, the people that you see here on this image. It turns out that that dream was too hard. That the students would go home and try and talk to grandmas, grandpas, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, and they couldn't get the stories. They couldn't necessarily always even get the language. So the project had started in, I think, about 6 months. It came to a screeching halt, that the dream as envisioned could not happen. Not only that, but many of the students who were involved got really depressed that some of this knowledge apparently is lost. So we needed to reconceive the project, and that's where it's important to be in a collaboration and figure out what are the new goals that we can all get behind. And we decided that the thing that we're going to do is focus on language. So if we have the word for sky in 4 of the 6 languages, well, then that's what we're going to show. So, so that was, and we talked also about the origin stories, because we realized that even if you know your own nation origin story, almost certainly you don't know the origin story of the other members of other nations. And so that became useful, not only for people who are identified with one of the nations, but also, of course, for the many people who came to these programs who were not necessarily in any way Indigenous. It occurred to me now, so I'm going to pause right here, right now. There's probably a whole lot of stuff that I have assumed that's understood, and it's not. So I'm just going to ask, is this making sense so far, or would you like to ask any clarifying questions?
I forgot to mention that people stay on mute, but feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question, or you can put your question in the chat.
Okay, I had
I think
something.
it's clear to me. Yeah.
Okay. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just curious as to why the people had so much trouble getting the stories and things from their relatives. Was there a
They
common
they didn't
problem,
know
or
them.
they
They didn't
couldn't?
know them.
They just were unaware of any.
Yeah.
So
Nobody, yeah. I don't think we got a single story, even though she had given students extra credit, even though, you know, I think people were kind of keen to go specifically and
Yeah,
ask grandma, grandpa. And this is before COVID. This is before
Yeah.
COVID. I mean, with COVID, a
Yeah.
lot of the, you know, the knowledge holders passed on, right? Because so many of them, the Indigenous communities, certainly in Wisconsin, were hit very hard by COVID. So that's the reason. Yeah, so that's information was just not
Not there.
available.
Oh.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Well, now these are what is the term you use for these? Are they tribes or different?
Nations.
They're nations, okay.
Yeah.
So
So that's one of the things I found out. So thank you for asking. You can get yourself all tied up in a knot about what is the correct term for these entities, right? So I have found that basically when in doubt, ask. When in doubt, ask. There are some groups who prefer to be called a tribe. And in some cases, the word tribe is part of their official name. So you have to negotiate that with who you're working with. Whatever they want, obviously, that's what it is. But in this case, we use the term nations.
and did the people from different nations hear of the, for instance, the origin stories of the other nations, and did they have any reaction to that?
They did not. No. Now, so this program first aired in 2018. And in 2018, what we did was we had a sequence of the programs kind of as I envisioned. So one nation would be highlighted. We would hear about the others, but there would be a representative of each nation on that 1 week. So we would have a speaker, for example, if we could find one. We couldn't find one across the board, but in most cases we did find a person who either certainly was part of the nation, and in some cases could even speak a little bit of the language. But the language is definitely, for all of these nations, they're in a state of revitalization. People are trying to learn it again. And young people, it's heartwarming that some people, you know, who are in their 20s, even though their parents don't speak the language, they are trying to learn it. So that's cool. Okay, any other clarifying questions? Or
Just one question. When you collect your origin stories, which are sometimes often, I guess, delivered by a non-Indigenous person, do you get the authentic version clear with the origin nation?
That's a great question. So here is what we did. The origin question was, as you can imagine, a loaded question. And we certainly had no interest in this being something told by a white person. So we were able to, in fact, we got permission from Wisconsin Public Radio, Television to show snippets of this was a program that they had done in collaboration with the nations. So they had elders of the different nations talk about their origin story. And on many occasions, I've been showing this program, and somebody in the audience will say, "Oh, that's Uncle so-and-so. I know this person," which is great. So they are telling their own story. And that also avoids the conversation of, well, what do you mean they're the first people? We are the first. Like you just don't get into that conversation. So we edited the movie. We give credit to Wisconsin Public Television, and we okayed that with all the people that the snippet for your nation's, your origin story, you're okay with. And that's how we did that. So there are no white people talking. It's only elders from each nation. That's an excellent question. Yeah. These are excellent questions. Anything else?
Jean, I just would like to know how the nations live in Wisconsin. Are they integrated with the white people, or separate lands, or?
So that's also an excellent question. The largest group of Indigenous people in Wisconsin now are what's called urban Indigenous people. So they live in cities, and I mean, you may or may not know that they are Indigenous, and they may or may not be an official member of the tribe. So they may or may not be registered in a particular tribe. There are reservations. The largest reservation in Wisconsin, and it is fairly large, is the Menominee Nation. And the Menominee Reservation is so big, I think, so if this is what I understand to be true, that the International Space Station uses it as an indicator of resolution. They have a very healthy forest, what's the word I want? Management. And so the end of the reservation is beautifully denoted with a stark green versus not. So there are reservations in different parts of Wisconsin. Yeah, so there are people who live in reservations, and there are also members of these nations who live in cities, urban, as I said. Yeah. Excellent questions. I'll keep going then. I realize that maybe what you really want to do is see some of the slides of the Indigenous Voices program, but you'll let me know when that time comes. One of the things I was super proud of is that students, so this was one of the points of this whole exercise, was to make students who are Indigenous feel seen. It is 1%. There is 1% of in the U.S. Census. I believe there's a 1% of Indigenous, and that includes Pacific Islanders and everybody else. In Alaska, I'm sure all Indigenous people are 1% of the population. So it's easy to get lost. So it was important to me that if there were students or anybody, that they were going to be in the center spot in the planetarium, that they were, in the spotlight, as it were. And it was wonderful to see people who did come from reservations to see these programs, to see their people. The Stockbridge Munsee band, so here is a band, is a particularly sad story because they, I think, uniformly have lost Mohican, which is the language that their band speaks. So it is very important to give them any airtime, any kind of public outward-facing opportunities as possible. And the twins here, so Mohican on the far right, so the two girls are twins, and they were presenters at the planetarium, and it was great because it also reminded people that Indigenous people are students at universities, and one of them, in fact, was she was doing bioengineering, and of course I get excited about that. These are two members of the Menominee Nation. They both spoke at the planetarium. This is kind of in the middle. You can see almost the struts of the machine behind them. This for me was probably, if not the most exciting moment. It was pretty close. Monet Warrington is she's finished now. She was a graduate student in museum studies, and Katney is a teacher in the school on the Menominee Nation's reservation. They were speaking, and they had brought something like 15 or 16 girls from the middle school of the Menominee Reservation, and that was, many hours drive. And you could just see how proud the girls were that two women that they knew were speakers in an environment like this in a university planetarium. I was so happy. I thought this is worth all of the trouble, all of it. It's great. This was really, really exciting to me. So the three take-home messages for this particular kind of collaboration with Indigenous people is that these collaborations take time. And when I say time, I'm not talking about months, I'm talking about years, in the sense that when we talk about traumatized people, what that looks like is they have been so often misled, so often lied to, that their first response naturally is just to be a bit suspicious of what is your motivation? Why are you wanting to work with them? What is your real motivation? And until you just spend the time and keep showing up and just keep showing up, you have to earn that trust. And that's just how that is. I learned that introductions are important when you meet people for the first time. That sounds obvious, but these are different kind of introductions. So you leave your titles and what you do and what you blah, 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 sort of the kind of introduction that would be common. You set that aside and you start talking about, where are your people, about your family, more about you as a human rather than you as your accomplishments or what you do for a living, which is nor here nor there for this kind of conversation. Discussing goals is important. I suspect that many members of our planetarium community would probably imagine that what I dreamt was not going to be an unreasonable thing, and for some nations it isn't. But probably for the vast majority of Indigenous people around the world, it probably is not reasonable to imagine that they'll be able to tell stories in their language, and even in your common tongue, maybe not. So figure out what could be beneficial, what could be useful to everyone involved. And this was my moment to pause and ask if you, actually what I could do, if you want, I can have you hear a short story that I recorded by his name is Mike Zimmerman, and he's one of these wonderful people who speaks Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa. Would that be of interest?
Definitely.
All right, let me then bring
We didn't test out audio beforehand, so we'll find out.
we will find out. I realize that I can't have two keynotes going on at the same time. Okay, good. All right. So I think I had that. Well, let's see. If I do this,
is referred to most commonly in Ojibwe as Jibaimikan, and this refers to the road of ghosts, or the road, or the ghost road, or ghost path, and it refers to the walk that you need to take when you pass on from your life into the next existence. And said to take 4 days, which is why there's often a funeral fire for 4 days when your death is first announced, and then at the conclusion of it, the light is extinguished, to make sure that somebody is moving on. They're not gonna possibly come back to the origin point, which is what the fire is to serve, as sort of like a, hey, this is where you're starting from, but don't come back this way. Keep going, move on into the next existence.
okay, I feel like I need to do one more thing, and that is to have him introduce himself, and I'll show you also what it sounds like just to hear the languages. They belong to different families of languages, and they're really quite different. Okay, so let's see.
Ana,
Kwalu, Otsis to Kwalu,
Anong,
Nokosak,
Wiragumshke.
Isn't that cool? Now, the last time we did this program, which I believe was in November, we did not have Ho-Chunk. And a person in the audience said, I know these words in Ho-Chunk. And it's like, can we record you like now, right now? Anyway, we did manage to get her to come a different day. So now we have a recording of a Ho-Chunk person, which was a language that we had very little, we had none. We had basically none. So that was neat. Okay, so let me have, I wanted also to show you, those are two of the reservations that Potawatomi live on, and I'll just have you hear Mike Zimmerman introduce himself.
Mission Indigenous cost me go Jaganashimong on the way go dash Meshakigija Giamaji Basage in the go Nishnabe Mongo in Wago Nago dash Gi Gikno Magiano Mam Minawaki Gichigabi Kinda Soul Gomagong Minawagi Gikno Magian me Ojibwe Moin Gaye Borui Warmi Moin Minwago Pokegan Bode Warmi in the Bendagos me go dash you.
Perhaps you don't speak Potawatomi?
Hello, my name is Michael Zimmerman Jr. I am a Pokagon Band of Potawatomi citizen, tribal citizen. I used to teach here at UWM Potawatomi language and Ojibwe language, and I am here today to talk about constellations in the night sky.
Right. Okay. So you got a flavor now. So I will say this. So Mike left UWM. In fact, he and his wife left Milwaukee, and now they live in North Michigan. So you might spend a whole lot of time building relationships with people who are mobile, who leave, who do various things. So try and make sure that whoever you make contact with, you keep in contact with, but also make sure that you expand your network as much as you can, because that is going to be changing. I felt important, and I would love to pass that on to you, so somebody like Mike who knows the astronomy and can speak multiple languages, there are really not that many of those people. If we can record them, that means that now somebody can have that information. If a youngster decides, oh, I'd love to know how to say star, that they can. So I think it's our imperative. It's our obligation to help get these voices recorded. Okay. So is there anything else that you would like to see from that program? Because then I'll go back to my talk. Okay, got it. So close that. All right. So the next piece, the next grouping, and I'll share my screen again, has had different names. The current scheme now, what we call, is Under African Skies. One of the things that bothered me, I think, most was that Milwaukee is 40% African American, and certainly not 40% of our audiences were African American. So I was trying to figure out ways of sort of changing that. So what we have done for some time now is we have had programs that either incorporate a storyteller and music, and the storyteller could be an African-American person from here, or an African person who is a student or a faculty member or lives in the community, and they could talk about their culture, or some combination of both. As I said, there's often dancing, so that's fun. And this kind of program does attract a higher percentage of Black people in our community. So that certainly does change the demographic, which, was the point. So I consider this to be great. And it's fun, of course, for everyone to learn to dance. One of the people who gave a talk was a veteran. So he was in the Navy, and he did such a beautiful job of talking about being, on these big ships in the middle of the Pacific and grounding himself. He said that he would have 12-hour shifts, and he always made sure that at the end of the day, at nighttime, he would look and kind of connect to that bigger picture. And yeah, so that was a great way for him to relive that, because we, of course, tried to reproduce that in the planetarium. So that was fun. One of the take-home messages here, sorry, I think I must have skipped one, because well, maybe not. Okay, sorry. African Americans and African immigrants have different experiences. Often African immigrants who certainly work at a university often have had, come from wealthy families. Their education is top notch. They haven't had necessarily, they might have had the difficulties of an immigrant, but maybe not necessarily the systemic racism that a person who is multi-generation Black in the US. And that's a good it's a good thing to know going in. This might sound strange, but I'll say it. Find what you have in common. And what I mean by that is, of course, people have lots of things in common. For me, I can totally connect with a person as an immigrant because I'm an immigrant in the US. I was an immigrant in Canada. So I'm very familiar with that feeling of trying to navigate a new environment, a new culture. So figure out on a personal level, so what do you have in common so that you can connect there, and then everything else, I think, follows. One of the things I realized when I started this program several years ago now, that it's easy for us to surround ourselves with people who look like us and think like us and talk like us. And it's beneficial for everyone to make sure that you surround yourself with people who have different backgrounds and have quite different worldviews. And I think that makes these kinds of programs much easier to to put together. Okay, I will stop again, but I won't stop sharing in case it's not necessary for me to change screens again. Do we have any thoughts? What have your experiences been working with Black people wherever they come from? How many of you are in institutions where you feel like Black people are underrepresented? Yeah, so Alan has his hand up. Yeah. And what have you tried?
Well, there's two different aspects to it. One is the audience, the people who come to the Lawrence Hall of Science, and the other is our actual staff.
Yes.
So we have a skewed staff, not screwed, but skewed.
Yeah.
But the audience also, there's when you were talking about the population that's in your area, what percent is African American? That's a question I had, is how, part of the research that you do is to find out what the composition of your community is. And I don't think a lot of us have really done that, but ours is fairly high percentage of African American. And the only thing I'm aware of that we've done is to try to create programs that allow them to come to our place, the Lawrence Hall of Science, because there's barriers just to even get to the facility. It's like up on a hill. Transportation is an issue, and there's a cost to coming. So that's that's another thing that we do, is to get a sort of like a grant or a subsidy program that will allow the or the poorer communities to come.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a matter of money too. I decided to focus on African American people because it's such a large group in our community. But of course, I could have easily have also done the same thing for Hmong people, Hispanic people. They're not well represented, but we found that cultural programs bring more people through the door. Programs that are focusing on culture are interesting to a broader group of people. And if you collaborate, if you're in a university, if you collaborate with people on campus who do have connections in the community, they can bring people in, especially if you collaborate, they can bring people that you might not ever otherwise been able to do. Just they simply will not come. They simply do not imagine that. They don't feel welcome it's not a familiar place. They don't know where they're going. Campuses are notoriously complicated. The expense, our tickets are capped at $6 per person, which is a lot cheaper than a lot of other planetariums in the world. And we did for a while do a program called Stars, Stories, and Rhythms of Africa that was free. So people could just, come. And it was heartwarming because they really did come. Sometimes free programs, people don't come because, I don't know, if you haven't paid for it, there's no value, but they would be absolutely packed and people would bring their kids. It was really lovely. Anyway, I'll keep going. Okay, so Muslim, and not all Arabs are Muslims, and not, of course, all Muslims are Arabs. But that was kind of one of the first programs we did. And the point here was also to acknowledge my own biases, that because I grew up in Greece, and Greece and Turkey have had a very complicated relationship for a long time, and I realized that I had a blind spot. And I started actually meeting Muslim people, and I thought, oh, okay. I guess I better I better learn more about this. And a trip to Istanbul and a trip to Dakar in Senegal was a real eye-opener, because for the first time, first of all, I was, a white person with my son, the only white person all around. So that was something that made me think, oh, this is how it feels. Remember how that feels. And I also got to meet not the stuff that you hear on the news, but you get to see regular folks just going around their business, and you realize, oh, these are wonderful, lovely, warm people. Of course they are. So Mohammed at that time was an undergraduate student. Bless his heart. He loves the planetarium, and he's given many presentations now. The Arabian Nights was fun because we decided to, so he spoke about Algerian culture, and a Palestinian woman, Lena, spoke about Palestinian culture. And while I was looking at stars, I had worked on a rendition of Arabian Nights, of a story from the Arabian Nights. Anyway, it was a wonderful event. Mohammed insisted on bringing cookies and tea. And when he was pouring tea for people and giving, these desserts, it seemed to me that many people in the audience had never been served, had never had an interaction like that with a young Muslim man, ever. And I thought, this alone is worth, 1,000 words and 1,000 pages, that you're making real connections between people. Last time Mohammed gave a talk was under the context of Under African Skies. We try and have different countries from different parts of Africa, and he's from Algeria, so from Northern Africa, and he actually sang a song, which was lovely. So this was a way of again, bringing different cultures and backgrounds into the planetarium. So suggestions here is understand and recognize your biases. We all have them. Best to know what they are, and so you can kind of educate yourself. I feel like learning more about the Muslim faith and culture made me a better teacher as well, in two different ways. So I teach a course on searching for life in the cosmos, and it was actually focusing on first generation students. And I could see that of the probably about a third of the class was like this. And I thought, they signed up for a course for searching for life, but they're really quite hostile about this topic. And then I realized, oh, let's see what the Quran says about looking for life elsewhere. And it turns out the Quran is totally behind it, is completely. And I gave them a reading about this. And the moment that they understood that the Quran is not against the possibility that there could be life elsewhere, they totally relaxed and they embraced the topic. It was really quite a transformation. The other part is that now I'm more sensitive to when Ramadan is, so I will not bring treats during Ramadan in a class if I know that some of the students are Muslim, because they can't eat, and it's very awkward to have some people eating and some people not. So it's just good. And one of my students said, oh, it's so nice to have someone know something about Ramadan. And anyway, so that was, again, it's a way of making students feel seen and respected. I also found, so for all of these groups, listening and following people's lead. Don't assume the fact that somebody maybe grew up in Iran does not mean that that he or she is a observant Muslim. Just follow their lead. If they're drinking wine, that probably means that they're not observant. You ask them, I mean, my trick now is if I invite Muslim people over to my house, I say, bring what you'd like to drink. And then they can sort themselves, you know, they can bring whatever they like. Okay, so I will stop and hopefully, okay, so we did have conversation, but it's 1:45. Yes, okay. I'm happy to answer any other question that you have. Somebody, we have somebody who's talking, but maybe they don't know that they're muted or they're talking to someone else.
I think he's talking to someone else.
Must assume.
I'll go ahead with the question. In the programs that you have, I guess 2 parts. How do you get the artwork that you want to put on the dome? And 2, are those mainly focused on origins, or do you also include like applications of past knowledge, like navigation, calendars, sky time telling, and things like that?
I quickly realized when I became the director that I better buy the skills I don't have. So the nice thing about being on a campus is that there are a lot of undergraduate students who are very good in Photoshop and other software packages. So I hire students who do this for me. And I guide them. I did have for many years a very talented young man, but I do find talented people and they make all the designs for me. They make the artwork for me. So that's number 1.
In the case of Indigenous, are they Indigenous and knowledgeable? I guess I'm curious more about Indigenous type artwork.
Okay, so for Indigenous, no, they were not. But they worked very closely with our collaborators. And there were lengthy conversations about, is there going to be a Thunderbird? I mean, the designs were very carefully negotiated. I mean, he would give them a couple of examples and they would say, oh yeah, you want this or you want that. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're having a Chinese person talk about the Lunar New Year in February. And my students say, oh yeah, let's have red lanterns, let's have this, or let's have money envelopes, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and chocolates and coins, chocolate coins. And I said, yeah, that's all very nice, but pass it by the speaker to see if she says yes. And she said yes. However, make sure that in each of those envelopes you have an odd number of coins. Okay. I mean, you have to ask. You can't know. So there was another portion of your question, but I don't remember it now. Sorry.
It was more on the Indigenous or historical applications.
Yes. So one of the pet peeves that Indigenous people have is that they are referred to in the past. People talk about, okay, and these people thought, and these people did, blah, blah, blah. So it's very important to talk about them in the present. And to me, for all cultures, it isn't so much, especially if they can't tell you, it isn't so much about what people did, what people thought, it's what people are doing, what people are thinking now. So, and again, a lot of the people that you will invite to your planetarium may or may not know anything about astronomy. So that's not the focal point. The focal point is for them to talk about their culture. And, and usually the kinds of things that we talk about are things like, let's talk about, I mean, Guilherme has given one of these talks when we had a whole section about South America. So we talk about food, we talk about music, we talk about artwork, important things, if you had like 4 or 5 important moments in time that we would need to know, what would they be? So that you feel that you understand more about this alive culture rather than, you know, what people were doing 200 years ago. Obviously, if you have access to Indigenous people who are knowledgeable about astronomy, well, you know, bully for you, then record them because they're very rare and special.
Thank you.
I've got a question about when you just sort of logistics and how it works in the planetarium when you have a guest speaker. Can you describe a little bit more how that works in terms of, is it done in conjunction with a planetarium program? Are they part of a planetarium program?
Yeah,
Or is it
they're part
not
of a
in the
planetarium. So they're part of a planetarium program. We have a concentric theater. So that means that the person can kind of stand near the middle. There are projectors and so the same pictures that you saw would be put in 4 different parts of the dome so that no matter where you're sitting, you'd be able to see. Typically, the person would be talking for something like, I mean, it depends on the circumstances, 20 minutes. Usually we would have stargazing for 20 minutes, and the trick is to take the audience to the latitude of the person speaking. Well, that's just always fun. That's always fun. And then show and then have a conversation with the audience. So the audience, you want to make sure there's plenty of time for people to ask questions, because there'll be all kinds of questions from people who really don't know anything about it and they're genuinely interested, to people who do and want to get something specific, you know, some specific term or something, or some understanding that eluded them. So and sometimes you'll have people who will say, you know, they'll share, and this has happened more than once, where an elder tells a story right there and then. It's spontaneous, and you can't record it because you haven't gotten permission, but you think, oh, but the people in the room were benefited from this experience. So the more you do it, the other thing is, when you develop a reputation of doing these kinds of programs, when you approach people, they've heard about you. They do want to work with you. And that's been a delightful change for me. That at first it was, you had to sort of convince them, well, what does this look like? But now they see, or they've even been. So the Under African Skies program seems to now is a self-sustaining situation, that I always have somebody in the audience who is a national of, you know, Nigeria or any number of countries. And they say, hey, can I do that? I want to do that. So every year I get sort of my next group of people for the following year.
So these are totally, I mean, that tells us that these are audience participation programs, and that you could do similar thing with a recorded program, but it would be recorded.
Yeah. And everything I do is live anyway. So
yeah.
Which gives that immediacy, which, yeah, if I had to give that up, I mean, I think if I did virtual programming because we had to, there was no other choice, but boy, I came back to live programming with a vengeance.
Rosemary has her hand up.
So the way you approach cultural astronomy is very present day oriented, I think. And it is true that Indigenous people are not a people of the past. It's evolved. And so now sometimes it's kind of a mix of Western and especially religion, Western and Indigenous religions. But Um, in planetariums now, it seems to be not many of that type of programming, but more of a typical sky culture, constellations, where there's really short little vignettes about various connections of stars in different cultures in the past, mainly. And also, I would say like storytelling for young people. And I always am curious about storytelling for young people because there are so many versions, a lot of them written by white people. And so I just wonder if there's some authentic aspect to bring into those stories as well. It seems like you've got just a multitude of people now that you can draw from in terms of Indigenous cultures, but that's not the typical planetarium, I think.
No, but I think the advice I was given, it's also, so there's also this thing about Native American people, like it's one thing, and it's not.
Yeah.
And many of us here are not even in the US. So what I would say is find the Indigenous people wherever you are, the people there. I mean, yes, if you live close to Navajo country, Navajo seems to be a much more a larger community. I think many things there are, I mean, there are plenty of Navajo speakers, etc. Find the people in your community and give them a voice. That's what I would say, wherever you are. And there's always going to be Indigenous people. I mean, I say that maybe in Greece, you'd have a hard time finding Indigenous people who are not Greeks, but what is true is that there are hidden minorities that people don't necessarily talk about, certainly plenty of immigrants. So I think by the time you consider Indigenous people, smaller pockets of populations who, for whatever various reasons, are where they are, and immigrants, I think we all have populations we can work with who are not necessarily represented by the 6 o'clock news. Or if it is, they're not well represented.
No,
And how
that-
do you, I'll just one quick follow on. How do you handle the fact that people in one community are interested about other communities and other cultures where there's no local people to draw on? And I suspect a lot of these types of programs are the ones that Native Americans don't particularly care for, the ones that are shown.
I would imagine not, which is why I tried so hard to make it as genuine as I could. So for the 100th anniversary of the planetariums, we decided to do two kind of big things. One was to get the university going to invite Mae Jemison, so the first African-American woman, well, the first Black person first Black woman in space, to give a distinguished lecture at the planetarium. And that, well, at a bigger venue at the university, but at a bigger ballroom. And that was awesome. And the other big move was that for Under African Skies in February of 2024, one of the speakers is going to be Suzanne Murabana from the IPS, who I happen to hear in some spot. And she's going to talk about Kenya today and astronomy in Kenya today. So I think that we can guide audiences to some extent. Yes, they might be interested, but if you say, these are the Indigenous people of our community, these are the people, if you give them a voice, I think people start recognizing, oh, that's the real deal. That's the real deal. These are the real people. And we can, yeah, I think it's good to get people more authentic information.
Thank you.
Something you were saying, Jean, about finding out what your community is composed of leads me to a question about, for everybody in this group, and it's a relatively small group, so I'm wondering if it'd be okay to go around and each person say what's in your area or what is your concept of, you know, what your community is and what your audience is in terms of composition? Like, and for instance, and I probably speak for the two other people from California here, is that we have an unbelievable mix. You know, it's white, African American, Hispanic or Latino, and Asian. I mean, like, we have an unbelievably unmanageable mix of people, but hopefully harmonious. But I was wondering what some of the other people are, like Guillermo. You know, what kind of mix do you have in your area?
Right. Well, Brazil is giant as United States or Europe. So it's completely different. I am really in the south, and we have a lot of people here that would be closer to European people than in other states of Brazil. As we work with schools, 95% of our public is made of schools, and from these 95 of public schools, so our public is completely diverse for the planetarium. We get all kids in the planetarium.
I should clarify. I'm not talking about kids. Kids, the schools, we do get schools. The schools are perfectly diverse. I'm talking about the grown-ups. I'm talking about the public programs that are open to everyone. I should have explained.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I understood that. I'm just explaining my public. For the open shows, then we have a whiter public, more white people than for the school public. We are now working on an Indigenous show that we worked with a community that is from this region. And it's a show that we call the origins of our culture. The chimarrão that I'm drinking here, it's from Indigenous origin. So it's a show talking about the origins of our culture, but from that we received from their culture. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Let's see. Andrew, what's it like in your neck of the woods?
So Auckland, especially for New Zealand, is probably like you are, a very, very diverse population. I think now Auckland is about 25% Asian based, and quite across Asia from South Asia as well as East Asia. So it's very large population that way of immigrated over recent decades. The traditional Indigenous population, the Maori population, has a very strong influence, although small percentage-wise, I think 8-10%, but culturally wise is kind of the main part of the nation, and a lot of work's done with that. And a lot of resurgence has been happening in the Maori and Pacific Island awareness in recent years, and the cultures there. So we get the Pacific, and of course on the Pacific side is the navigation comes through strong. The celestial navigation comes through strong. So I'm often teaching that, and then even from the traditional European base, that's got to water down a lot, but it's but yeah, there's a large South African population in New Zealand. There's pockets all over the place of have immigrated over recent decades, so it is very diverse and makes it interesting. I know in the observatory and the planetarium, a lot of work's been done to bring some of the different cultures and from the kind of poorer areas of the city into the access to the planetariums, and especially through the education school programs. They use similar to what Jean had, using a grant program that was subsidizing. I mean, one of the barriers we found was getting from some of the lower socioeconomic areas was the bus fares. wasn't just their mission to come to the planetarium, it was actually the transport, because Auckland's spread out. And so they found a grant program that basically paid for the transport to bring school groups in, and then subsidised their entry fee as well. So that was very successful in diversifying the audience base. And then it was but there was always been a barrier of getting that wider, diverse part of the population in. Even a lot of the adults thinking that the kids would come into the school group and I don't need to go to the planetarium because my kids have already been. But when they actually finding other ways of getting the adults to the planetarium through and often through non-astronomy programs to get them here. But it's not an ongoing thing in the very, very diverse multicultural population in Auckland. But it creates lots of opportunity as well to look at the sky in different ways and look at different ways of looking at backgrounds.
Yes.
It's great. Let's see, Cal, are you still there?
I'm still here. Yeah, so here in the nation's capital area, I'm actually not really directly affiliated with planetariums anymore. I volunteer at the National Air and Space Museum. So they have a planetarium in the National Mall building in downtown DC, but they have a portable out in Chantilly, Virginia at the Udvar-Hazy Center. But I spend my volunteer time mostly with discovery stations and specifically with the Meteorite Discovery Station. Where, as a sort of a destination place, we're a destination for both local and for, international tourists. So we get a wide variety of visitors. And one of the things I like about doing the Meteorite Discovery Station is to have a variety of specimens that may be close to where people come from who visit. And so that's a way of doing a connection between space and their localities. And so I find that to be pretty satisfying in terms of being able to connect to people and giving them something that they might not really have been able to experience before, even as part of a big time institution such as the Air and Space Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian, which has specific museums targeted to various groups.
Great, thanks. Does anybody else want to chime in at this point?
Just an interest one for Jean was, she was talking about the different languages in the different Indigenous languages for the different nations. I was just interested, is there any commonality between the languages, or are they completely diverse or different?
Completely. So there were 3 different linguistic families. Most of them are Anishinaabe in origin. So Potawatomi and Ojibwe are very close, like Spanish, Italian. And then you have Menominee and okay, one more is part of that family. Then you have Oneida, which is Orakoan language. So these are completely different families. It's like talking about Indo-European and Hungarian, completely different languages. And if you paid attention, the star, I can't reproduce the word, but it's a 15-syllable word. It was Oneida, and that it just sounds completely different sound, completely different. And then the other language, Ho-Chunk, is part of the Siouan family, so completely different. So some of them are from the same family of languages, so they're similar. But even so, I think many of them simply would not, certainly people who speak Anishinaabe and people who speak Ho-Chunk would certainly not be able to communicate. Oh, Mohican. Mohican is the fourth language I'm missing in Anishinaabe. But even the people who speak, Western or Eastern Anishinaabe languages, they are quite different. I mean, ask an Italian how much Spanish they really understand, and you realize that it's close, but still there's quite a bit of difference. I am terrible. I'm sorry to say this, but I really need to go.
Well,
so
thank you, Jean. This has been really, really good presentation. And
thank you. Thank you for coming. I know this is a busy time, so I appreciate your interest and attention. Thank you. And I hope if you have any questions, I did put my email, but let me just put it here, that you can email me if something occurs to you that you didn't have a chance to ask.
Yeah, I have about 5 more questions, so I will email you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I probably have a few as well.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy New Year.
You too.
Right. All right.